Okay, so why do people commit crimes? It's one of those huge questions, right? And there are just so many different theories trying to figure it out. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most practical and, honestly, influential approaches out there. One that tries to get real about what causes crime and who it really affects. And look, if you've ever studied this stuff, you've probably seen something like this. You're staring down these complex questions that demand really clear, solid answers. The pressure's on, and you need a way of thinking, a framework that actually makes sense of what's happening in the real world. You might get hit with a big one like this, asking you to evaluate a whole school of thought. That's a heavy lift, you know? You have to weigh up all these competing ideas. Or maybe a question that zeroes in on one specific piece of the puzzle. The point is, to answer any of them well, you need a solid theoretical toolkit. And that is exactly what we're here to build today. So, let's get into it. Let's talk about a theory that tries to be super practical about crime, left realism. It really came about as a reaction to other theories that, on one hand, kind of ignored the real harm crime does to communities, or on the other hand, just shouted for more policing as the only answer. At its heart, left realism says, hey, crime is a real problem, especially for working class people. It shifts the focus away from just saying crime is about an individual's bad choices and instead looks at the social conditions that create crime in the first place. For left realists, the root causes aren't just bad apples, they're deep-seated social injustices. So how does that actually work? Well, left realists, especially sociologists like Leah and Young, pointed to three key ingredients that, when you mix them all together, create a pretty potent recipe for crime. Let's break them down one by one. First up, we have relative deprivation. Now, this is absolutely crucial. This isn't just about being poor, period. You can be poor and not turn to crime at all. This is about feeling poor compared to everyone else. It's that burning sense of injustice you get from seeing what others have, feeling like you're entitled to it too, but seeing all the doors to get it slammed in your face. It's that gap between what you expect out of life and what your reality actually is. And this isn't just some abstract idea. I mean, take a look at this number. When nearly half of one group in society is experiencing poverty, while another group is at 19%, that creates a massive, powerful, and very real sense of unfairness. According to left realism, that feeling is a key driver for crime. Okay, ingredient number two is marginalization. This is what happens when people are basically pushed to the very edges of society. They feel like they have no one speaking up for them, no real power to change their situation through the normal legal channels. They're not represented in government or big business. They're on the outside looking in. And you can literally see this on a map. When certain groups are 3 times more likely to live in areas that are cut off from good housing or essential services, that is a clear sign of marginalization in action. It's not just about where you live, it's about being systematically shut out from the resources you need to get ahead. So, what happens when you take that feeling of relative deprivation, of injustice, and you combine it with being marginalized, with having no power? Well, according to Leah and Young, you get the third and final ingredient: subcultures. These are groups that basically form their own set of rules and values as a way to cope with being blocked from mainstream society. And for some, that can mean turning to crime to get the success they feel they've been denied. Okay, so we've got the causes, but left realism doesn't just stop there. It also gives us a really useful tool for understanding how society responds to crime, and it's called the square of crime. The whole idea here is that you can't understand crime by just looking at the offender. That's only one part of the story. You need all 4 pieces of the puzzle. The offender, yes, but also the victim, the state, which means the police, the courts, and of course, the public. And the most important part is that crime is really the result of the relationships between these 4 corners. Think about it. If the public doesn't trust the state, say the police, then they're not going to report crimes. And if crimes aren't reported, victims get no justice, offenders don't face any consequences, and the police can't do their job. You see? A breakdown in one corner makes the whole thing fall apart. But, like any theory, left realism isn't perfect. To really get a handle on it, we have to look at it critically. So where are the cracks? What are the potential weaknesses in this whole approach? This quote right here gets to the heart of a really big challenge for the theory. If marginalization and relative deprivation are the main things driving crime, then why do some groups who experience them have very different rates of offending? It kind of suggests that those 3 key ingredients we talked about, well, they might not be the whole story. It's a fantastic question, isn't it? If the theory explains some of what's going on, but not everything, what other factors could be at play here? What else is missing from the picture? Well, critics usually point to a few key areas. First, as we just saw, it has a tough time explaining the different crime rates between different marginalized groups. Second, some critics argue that maybe it doesn't go deep enough. Could structural racism itself be the root cause of both the social injustice and the higher imprisonment rates? And finally, just on a practical level, this whole idea of subcultures is really difficult to pin down and measure with hard data. And that kind of leads us with a final, really powerful thought to chew on. Left realism forces us to connect crime not just to what one person does, but to the very fabric of our society. If this theory is right, and the feeling of injustice is a key driver of crime, what does that mean for a world where the gap between the richest and the poorest just seems to be getting wider every single day? That's a question worth thinking about.